Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our webinar on acceptance and commitment therapy. My name is Danielle Daly. I'm the Professional Development Coordinator with the Illinois Crisis Prevention Network. I'm just going to go over a couple housekeeping things, and I'm going to pass it on off to Tyler for his presentation. So everyone is muted and your cameras are disabled. If you have any questions, comments, resources, we'd love to hear from you. So please be sure to use that chat box on the lower part of your screen. You can also use the Q&A to ask questions. Please visit our website. It is icpn.org, and I will put that into the chat box for you. You can review our past workshops. We have some of those recordings on there. You can also view what we have upcoming. So for the month of October, we have using person-centered thinking to develop behavior plans. And then we are also doing a webinar on the past 10 years of SST services and the lessons that we've learned from that. So that's going to be a great one as well. You can also on the website sign up to be on our mailing list to receive those upcoming webinars. So please do that. CEs. So please give us like 14 days to get them out to everyone. We have a lot of people on today, so they will come to the email that you have registered with. So the link that you clicked on, it'll provide me with your attendance, and I will get those out to you hopefully within the next 14 days. I will put all that information into the chat box so that you can review that. I will also provide my email address. Please feel free to reach out to me with any questions or concerns. But Tyler, it's all you now.
All right. Thank you very much. So welcome, everybody. My name is Dr. Tyler Demers. I'm a clinical psychologist. I am a 4-year veteran of the support services team here at over here at ICPN. So prior to that, I was working at Trinity Services directly, where I worked quite closely with the PSR programs, the psychosocial rehabilitation programs, where we really focused on supporting adults that had both intellectual disabilities as well as pretty significant serious mental illness and supporting their challenging needs. And I have quite a bit of experience working there. I was the director of one of our programs for a while. And so I feel like I am pretty well equipped to talk about the ways that both myself and others will use acceptance and commitment therapy in a really practical way that I hope you will be able to apply not only to the people that you support, but to yourself, because ultimately we need to be showing up as the best versions of ourselves, and ACT is really successful at helping us kind of look at our own thoughts and feelings, and as we'll get into. For those of you who don't know me, this is going to be my last webinar. Actually, I'm going to be transitioning from the support services team within the next week or two, where I'm going to be going to work in private practice. But I'm still here and happy to answer any questions along the way. So as was mentioned, there is a question and answer box. Feel free to throw in some questions along the way. The way that this is going to be set up, those of you who have seen maybe my presentation that I did for the ICPN conference, you're going to notice that there's a lot of similarities between this presentation today and that presentation. And I did that purposefully. I wanted to really take some of the information that I kind of blew through before and really break it down, slow down, get into some of the details, add in some more exercises. I'm going to try to make this very experiential. I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of ACT and sort of where it's fit within the larger behavioral health tradition. And then I'm going to start getting into some of the ways that ACT helps us understand or conceptualize how people get stuck in their lives, and just practical strategies for what we can do with that. So without further ado, we'll get started here. Figure out the controls. Okay, so nope. There it is. Now, I should note here, the slides did go around beforehand. I will say I went back in and I got a little creative since my last presentation, and I added some new um, pictures and things like that. But I can assure you, everything in the handouts that you have that has been posted beforehand, all the words and information is there is the same, but your memes may vary. I'm a kind of a fan of irreverent memes, so you're going to see quite a few of those pop up throughout the day, just to make it fun and interesting. So, very excited to talk about ACT. ACT is my orientation of choice. If I had to pick one lens through which to view human psychopathology or mental illness, it would be ACT. And I think I'll make a pretty good case today for why. I think others should as well. So ACT's an intrapersonal therapy, intrapersonal. Now, there are a lot of other types of therapy that view psychopathology through different lenses, right? Almost like different shades, different ways of looking at it. For instance, one of our other clinicians, Matt, gave a presentation recently on functional analytic psychotherapy, which is very grounded in the therapeutic relationship between the therapist and the client, and on working on interpersonal dynamics and the way those carry out into the real world. ACT is more intrapersonal, right? So we're still working with a therapist. We're still, therapists like myself are still doing clinical work with somebody, but we're really focusing on their internal experience. ACT takes the philosophical assumption that everybody's suffering, right? We're all going through hell sometimes. But some of us are going to end up suffering more than others. The reason that is, as we'll get into here, is that the assumption of this assumption of destructive normality. Okay. Now, this idea is that normal language and thinking processes are often destructive and can lead to worse or unusual psychological dysfunction. Okay. In other words, pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. What destructive normality means is that there's the assumption that what is normal, what is healthy, what everybody experiences is a certain level of pain, right? Of destructiveness. Okay. We can compare that, on the other hand, with other types of views, say psychoanalytic. Think of Sigmund Freud and sitting on the couch. That's one particular orientation of therapy. Cognitive behavioral therapy, which I'll get more into shortly. Cognitive behavioral therapy takes this assumption of healthy normality. The idea that we are born like right out the box, healthy, well-adjusted. And it's not until things come along in our life, psychological illness, mental illness, that we struggle. Okay. ACT takes a very radically different view of this and says that we're all hurting, we're all broken in one way or another. Okay, that's normal. That's constant. But how we choose to respond to that pain and to respond to that destructive energy, that's where suffering comes. That's the key. There we go. Okay, a little bit of a history lesson here. Now, I mentioned how there's lots of different orientations to therapy: psychoanalytic therapy, cognitive behavior therapy, client-centered therapy, all different kinds of therapy. And what all of these different therapies are trying to do is answer the question, where do people get off track, right? How does psychopathology develop? And how do we get people back on track, right? At its most foundational view, that's what therapy is all about, right? That's what psychology is all about. So this has been going on forever, right? For as long as we've had minds and the ability to speak, we've been trying to figure that out. In the 1950s and 60s, we had a very strict black and white behavioral approach. Okay, oftentimes this is called operant or classical conditioning. Some of you may be familiar with the story of Pavlov's dog, the dog who, Pavlov being one who came up with a lot of the principles of the first wave of behaviorism, or at least put them to words, that when he rung a bell at the same time that he presented food to a dog, or meat powder, I think was the original experiment, that the dog would salivate. And he learned that by pairing those two things together, he could ring a bell and make the dog salivate. He's pairing an automatic response to something that he's conditioning in the dog. Okay, that's strictly a behavioral approach. And that's at least where the behavioral approach of the 50s and the 60s grew out with B.F. Skinner. And the focus was a lot more on overt behavior change. Okay, they weren't really focused on thoughts and feelings. Like I mentioned with Pavlov's dog, and you can see in this picture up here of stimulus, there's a black box and a response. First wave behaviorists view that black box as thoughts and feelings. We know that something's being processed through there, but we don't really care because we can't see it, so we're not interested in it. Okay, that's first wave of behaviorism. Now, it wasn't until a couple decades later that we have the second wave of behaviorism, which includes things like cognitive behavior therapy. REBT is rational emotive behavior therapy, and it is a different, it's similar to CBT. They have a lot of similarities, but some differences. But basically, all of these second wave models, we are finally starting to get into the mind, the thoughts, the feelings, right? The second wave behaviorists are saying, whoa, hold on. There's more than just stimulus response. There are things going inside of our very complicated brain, and we can figure these out, right? But they take the approach of a mechanistic model. Okay, and CBT is still practiced today, and it still has a lot of data to support it. It basically takes the assumption that the mind, you think of it like this way. I'm going to have a lot of metaphors today because ACT is really big on metaphors. A mechanistic model is going to treat our minds like a machine that's made up of different parts. Think about under the hood of your car, right? If you're not a mechanic, that all looks crazy confusing. But if you take your car into the shop because it's making a funny noise, and the mechanic says, oh, hey, whatchamacallit is broken, we can take that out, put a new one in, car runs fine again, right? That's how a metaphor for the mechanistic model. It assumes that all dysfunctional, maladaptive or pathological thoughts, feelings, schemas, core beliefs, right? That'll sound familiar if you're familiar with CBT. They develop over the lifespan, right? Healthy normality, right? We're born healthy, and over the course of our life, things come along that cause us to develop these dysfunctional, maladaptive, pathological thoughts, feelings, behaviors, right? So what the goal is from a mechanistic model, from CBT model, is to identify the parts of our mind, of our thought processes that are damaged, and we remove them, we replace them, or we repair them, right? Cognitive behavior therapy is going to utilize things like cognitive distortions and engage in cognitive restructuring techniques. But basically, what it means is there's a part of my brain that's not working right. I'm having these thoughts and having these beliefs that are getting in my way. So I'm going to identify those thoughts, and I'm just going to change them, right? That's easy. We change the thoughts. We come up with strategies. We say nice, positive things to ourselves. We analyze whether or not what we're believing that's getting us stuck is true, right? Let's say I have stuck with the belief that I'm a failure and nobody likes me, right? So a CBT therapist there's a lot of different ways they may attack this, but through cognitive restructuring, coming up with new thoughts to replace that, or for instance, they might really dig down and analyze and kind of have a Socratic discussion about how true that is, weighing pros and cons, things like that. And all of that does have its place, and it is helpful. But a lot of people also find that those strategies don't work for them. A lot of people find parts of CBT to be challenging, and it's from this view that we get to the third wave of behaviorism, right? Radical behaviorism. Very cool. When we say radical, it's a very radical shift in the way that we think about behaviorism. Okay, it kind of takes it back to our original first wave of behaviorism, but with radical behaviorism, everything we do is considered a behavior. Okay, so we're looking at it from almost a functional analytic perspective, like we were with the first wave of behaviorism, but we're looking at it in terms of the thinking, our feeling, our memories, right? The things that bother us, the things that we value, right? And this is a really radical shift from CBT, as you know, you'll see as we go along. There's a big emphasis on the third wave of behaviorism on acceptance and mindfulness, right? So thinking about CBT, the focus is going to be more on changing things. The emphasis of ACT is going to be on learning to accept and make room for things. Acceptance can be said another way too. The way that I like to talk about acceptance is it's like exposure. We're exposing ourselves to things that are hard, that we don't like, maybe about ourselves or a situation, and we're exposing ourselves to it. So from the perspective of, you know, a lot of times people will say to me when I'm talking about CBT versus ACT, you know, I'll get people that will say, but CBT still works, right? CBT still serves the function of helping people get through difficult emotions and life circumstances. And that's true. But if a review of the literature will demonstrate, it has demonstrated, they do what's called a dismantling study. And as you're going to see as I continue to go through and really get into ACT, there are a lot of components of ACT, just like there are a lot of components of CBT. When we say ACT or CBT, we're not just talking about one particular thing that we do. It's a whole package of interventions, skills, techniques, things that the therapist is going to use. Right? They're all under the umbrella of what we would call ACT, but they differ. And when studies go in and they take all of those different components and they break them down and statistically analyze them, what we find is that CBT works, but the most effective part of CBT is the exposure, right? Because in order to actually work through a distressing core belief about yourself through CBT, you have to engage with it. Even if you're arguing against it and battling it, you're still showing up, sitting with it and experiencing it. And the research has really showed us that right there, that exposure and willingness to sit with things that are uncomfortable is really where the change comes. It's really where how people change, right? Third wave of behaviorism, it's based on relational frame theory. So whereas the second wave was focused on mechanistic model, third wave behaviorism, including ACT, includes relational frame theory, in which language is the key to how we get stuck in painful thoughts and feelings. Right? So instead of going in and trying to change and alter the shape, size, or just content of a thought or belief, we're focusing more on deconstructing the language that is connecting us to these thoughts. I know that sounds really complicated, but I promise it will make more sense as we get into diffusion. But basically, a language allows us to create these relationships and associations, right? A child learns that if you show a child an apple and say apple, that child's going to learn that that's an apple. But then if you again show a child an apple, or if you say the word apple, the child's going to look around looking for an apple. They've made that connection. That connection goes two ways. It's a bi-directional relationship. Okay. Now, language has allowed us to solve complex real-world problems. And that's another component of the RFT. Now, a real in-depth explanation of how RFT works and what it's all about is definitely could take up another 2-hour webinar, and I'm not going to get into it. I highly recommend checking out this link below, or just Googling, a simple overview of RFT. And there's a lot of great free resources out there on that ACT provides to help better understand that. But the point here is that that acceptance and commitment therapy through RFT is more focused on through language, altering the way through which we relate to certain thoughts, feelings, beliefs. Right? It sounds very technical and complicated. It may. Promise it's going to make more sense as we go. But to my last point here, about language allowing us to solve complex real world problems. We have evolved to become the dominant species on Earth, human beings, right? Our ability to think and communicate with language in complex ways has allowed us to basically dominate this planet, right? So language is incredibly important. It's, aside from our ability to reflect and to think in our own thinking, what scientists call metacognition, just the ability to communicate, that wouldn't happen without language, and just the ability to communicate to solve problems, right? The problem is that a lot of the time we get caught up with the belief that we should feel happy whenever we, all the time, right? That the function of our mind is going to be to make us feel happy. And what we know is that that's not true. The focus of our mind is not to make us feel good. We look at this through an evolutionary perspective. Our brains evolved at a rapid pace to be able to communicate threats between each other and to solve problems that are going to keep us alive. Our brain's number one job is to maintain to maintain our aliveness, our life, if you will. That is the function of the mind. We can get caught up when we start to think that the function of our mind is to make us feel happy, but it's to protect us. And the challenge with this is the same things that might work well in the external world to solve problems that our mind helps us with actually create a lot of harm when we turn them in towards our internal world, right? For example, right, you see down here, I don't like the peeling paint on a wall. So I scrape the paint off, I put a primer coat on, I put a fresh coat on, and I just solved that, right? I can look at the paint, scratch my head and think, I know what I need to do. I need to go down to the Home Depot. I need to get some paint stripper, some scrapers, some paint, right? I can put together, I have a script for what I need to do. But the same thing does not necessarily apply to psychological problems, right? If I look internally and I'm plagued by trauma about something that happened to me earlier in my life, I can't just scrape that off, right? The same is true for anxiety, depression, negative feelings about themselves. I think anybody that's ever truly tried to talk themselves out of feeling a certain way can identify with the fact that it's really, really hard to just wash it away with a more positive thought because it's going to come back around, right? That's what our brains do. Our brains are threat detection systems, right? And we're constantly going to be looking at problems. Our brains are great at this. And later we can talk a little bit about ways that we can thank our brain, because ultimately our brain is serving us. It's trying to help us feel better, even if sometimes it gets to be a little overactive. I want to make this a little experiential now, since I realize I've been talking for quite a few minutes, and I want to get people kind of engaged here. So what I want everybody to do, see this? Everybody knows what this is, I imagine. Polar bear, white bear. Okay, so what I want everybody here to do, when I say go, I want you to not think about a white bear. You can close your eyes, leave them open, sing a song, rehearse something in your head, whatever you need to do, doesn't matter to me. But I want you, until I say stop, do not think about a white bear. All right. 1, 2, 3, go. Okay, good. Stop. That is about, that was about 10 seconds. Now, if I was in a more, if we were all together, I might kind of shout out to the room here, but I'm willing to bet that most people that really tried to do this exercise probably experienced either two things, right? One, when I get people to do this exercise, they're going to tell me, I did it. I didn't think about the white bear, right? It's true. You can do it, right? But it takes a lot of mental effort. And it's really hard to focus your attention on doing literally anything else when you're trying to not think about that bear, right? The other most common response is, yeah, I couldn't do that, right? And that's common, right? You're not going to go very long before either it pops back into your brain, or you need to kind of check in with yourself. Am I thinking about the white bear? But as soon as you ask yourself that question, you're thinking about the white bear. So it's an impossible task to just not think about it, right? So what does this mean? What does this mean for us? Does this tell us that maybe we don't have as much control over our thoughts, our feelings, even our emotions as we thought that we did? Does that, I mean, I think that's what that exercise demonstrates to me. So then what is the alternative to that, right? We don't have any control over any of our thoughts, feelings, beliefs. So what's the alternative? Do we just say whatever happens, happens, and we move on because there's nothing that we can do? And I said I like irreverent memes because I keep it fun. All right. That's not true. I'm joking. Suffering is not the answer, right? So, but I think it's pretty clear the point that ACT makes, and I'll continue to make this case as we go along, but our minds work by addition, not by subtraction. There's not a Control-Alt-Delete function to the brain. We can't just shut down things that we don't like. When we attempt to avoid internal experiences, thoughts, feelings, it actually makes these experiences more central, salient, or influential. In other words, stronger. Or when we attempt to escape from a difficult emotion, it can actually make it worse. A way that when we try to pull away from an emotion, I should say, there's an exercise that I've done involving a Chinese finger trap, right? When you have your fingers in a finger trap, most people who have used one understand that in order to get out of the finger trap, the answer is not to pull away, because the more that you pull away, the tighter it constricts and the harder it is to get away. So then the only other optional move there is to move in towards it, right? And that's basically the ACT approach, is we're going to move towards things that are important to us. But as I mentioned with RFT, we have extensive training and learning in deriving relations between event symbols and objects. So it makes sense from an evolutionary perspective that we're going to remember, right? Our brain is going to be primed to that. It is going to be primed to remember things like that. But for that reason, there's also no unlearning process. Once a connection is formed in our brain between an item or an object or an experience or what have you, it's there, right? Our thoughts and our feelings, they come from our history, from our experiences, right? Just if you're alone, repeat out loud after me. Mary had a little, right? Red light means, yellow light means, green light means, right? We've made this connection in our head from a very early age. We understand, stop, slow down, go. Mary had a little lamb, right? I know these are very simplistic examples, but it's to illustrate that our brains don't forget quite as easily as we think that they do. So then let's get into ACT then. Let's get into some of the components of ACT that are really, I think, going to benefit you. But when we talk about ACT, what are we accepting? What are we committing to, right? What does acceptance and commitment therapy mean? In layman's terms, we are going to accept what is in your personal control and be present, right? Contrasting that with an approach where we're going to try to change or alter things that are out of our personal control, right? Think CBT. We're going to commit to valued action that improves and enriches our lives, okay? And another big part of ACT is taking action, right? It's very interpersonal, like I said, but there's also going to be a lot of just a lot of encouragement to do the things that we care about and that we value. And that's what ACT is all about. Okay. Now, anybody who has any passing interest or has looked into ACT is probably familiar with what's called the hexaflex, which is this really big Mandela-looking diagram of all the different components of ACT. This is a different one. It's a, and I like this one a little bit better because I think it makes it a little bit easier to understand. In the middle of this triangle, we have psychological flexibility, because ultimately that's the goal of ACT, is to promote greater flexibility in terms of behavior and thinking, right? Being willing to let go of things that aren't serving us, or holding on to things that we need to hold on to, even if it's painful. Okay. When we talk about being present at the top of the triangle, we can see on one side we have contact with the present moment. On the other side, we have self as context. So bringing yourself into the here and now, which we're going to call mindfulness or being present, so that you can react effectively to life in the moment. This involves making contact with verbal and nonverbal aspects of here and now experience. Right? Contact with the present moment is really, like I said, it's about mindfulness. Self as context is probably the most complicated part of ACT, but I definitely am going to devote some time to that as we move along. It's also important that we, encourage people to open up using therapeutic skills, which we call acceptance diffusion, to deal with our painful thoughts and our feelings without getting stuck in them. And this involves learning to change your relationship to painful experiences rather than just continuing futile attempts to control them. We're also going to make sure that we do what matters. We want to clarify in the right-hand corner there, we have committed action and values. We're going to clarify what is truly important and meaningful to you. And we call that what we call values in a sense, and then use that knowledge to guide, inspire, and motivate you to change your life for the better, to make that committed action, to actually make an actionable change in your life. Okay? It's not just about sitting in a counseling room or sitting with yourself and reflecting on these things. ACT isn't effective until we're actually getting out there and doing things that are hard. So I'm going to have a couple exercises here that I want everybody to just kind of follow along with, consider. I want you to imagine in your mind that you're in a tug of war with some anxiety monster. Okay. It doesn't have to be anxiety, it could be depression, it could be anger, really anything that you feel like is causing you distress. You've got one end of the rope, the monster has the other end of the rope. And in between you, there's this huge bottomless pit. And you're pulling back as hard as you can. But the monster keeps on pulling you even closer to the pit. So what's the best thing to do in this situation? Right? A lot of people might say, well, I'm going to pull that rope really hard and I'm going to make that monster fall into this bottomless pit. That's what comes naturally, right? You want to pull, you have this experience and you want it gone, right? I think everybody can relate to having an emotional experience or a belief or just any kind of experience and that you just want it gone, right? So we push, we pull, we try to make it disappear. But the harder you pull in this scenario, the harder the monster pulls. So you're stuck. So what do we need to do? We can't pull. Well, the solution is drop the rope, right? When we drop the rope, the monster is still there. We can still see the monster, but I'm no longer tied up in a struggle with it. Now I can do something more useful, right? My hands are free. I'm not holding onto this rope, getting rope burn and, tiring out my arms. I'm going to build on this exercise or this metaphor a bit. I should have asked in the very beginning. If you have a piece of paper handy nearby you, or a book or a clipboard, literally anything, just that looks like a piece of paper, we're going to do a little bit of an exercise here. I want everybody to just follow along. You can pretend that we're sitting side by side, even though I know that we're not. But this is how this might look if I was explaining this to somebody. Imagine that out here in front of you, okay, is everything that matters to you. Okay. Deep in your heart, everything that makes life meaningful to you. All the people, all the places, all the activities that you love. Your favorite foods, drinks, music, books, movies, all that stuff. All the things that you like to do, they're all right here in front of you, in the space in front of you. That's also not all. There's also challenges that we have to experience, problems. We need to deal with these in our daily life, right? Conflicts with our kids, financial issues, health problems, job searches, all the things that might weigh on us, right? Also over there are all the tasks that you need to do on a regular basis to make your life work. Shopping, cooking, cleaning, driving, filing your taxes, all that stuff. Now I want you to copy me as I do this exercise. We're going to imagine that this sheet of paper is all of those difficult thoughts, feelings, emotions, and memories that you want to get rid of. Now hold it tightly at the edges like this. Push it as far away from you as you possibly can. This is what popular culture tells us to do, right? Get those thoughts and feelings away from you. Friends tell us to do this, doctors, therapists, counselors, right? But, well, it looks like, I don't know if everybody's trying as hard as they can. Make sure that you're really pushing it as hard as you can away. Push as hard as you possibly can. Straighten your elbows. Let's get those thoughts and feelings as far away as possible. Now I want you to notice three things. First is, how tiring is this, right? We've only been doing this for like maybe a minute or less, and my arms already feel kind of tired. Imagine doing this all day. How much energy would it consume? Right? Second, notice how distracting this is, right? If a person you love were right in front of you, right? How hard would it be to give them your full attention? If your favorite movie were playing on the screen over there, out in front of you, how much would you miss out on? Right? It's an important task, right? Spending time with your kids, maybe, or a difficult problem you need to tackle. Do you think you're going to be able to focus on it? Third, I want you to notice your effort and energy is going into this. So it's going to be really hard to take actions to do the things that make your life work, such as taking care of your home, driving to work, playing with your kids, right? So notice how difficult life is when you're struggling with thoughts and feelings like this. We're distracted, we're missing out on life, and it's hard to focus. You're exhausted. It's hard to do things that make life work. All right, so now I'll let you off the hook. Let's take the paper, and I want you to just put it gently on your lap. Let's see what happens when we drop the struggle. Big difference, right? It's clearly much less tiring. You probably feel like you have more energy, right? How much easier would it be to engage with and focus on what's in front of you? If your favorite person were in front of you, would you be more connected than when you have this big struggle going on in front of you? Now move your arms and your hands about, right? How much easier is it to take action like driving a car, cuddling a baby, cooking dinner, right? Hugging a person that you love, right? These are all the important things that make life worth living. And, you know, I want you to notice though, that all of this stuff on your lap hasn't disappeared, right? They're still here, but we've got a new way to respond to them. We're handling them differently. They're no longer holding us back, bringing us down, jerking us around, distracting us, right? There's something, it's as if there's nothing useful we can do with them, so we just let them sit there, right? So in a nutshell, that is that exercise I might do with the client to help them understand that the cost, right? The personal cost of engaging, struggling, going back and forth with thoughts, trying to push them away. So let's talk about some initial applications of the ACT model. I know I ask a lot of seemingly rhetorical questions. Anyone can feel free to chime in, but I'll just think about yourself too, if you can. But what are some typical interpersonal issues that some of the people that we support struggle with, right? Off the top of my head, anxiety, right? Obsessive thoughts, repetitive thoughts, paranoia, painful past memories. Like, the list really goes on and on. What do people what do people that we support do to manage these experiences? Think about how you or the people that you support avoid, right? What do you avoid? What ACT is going to do is encourage us to look at our thoughts from the perspective of workability rather than literal truth. I like the term workability that ACT comes up with, because basically what workability means is it working for you, right? Are you getting the need met, right? After you've gone through your head for the 10th time about whether or not you locked the door to your house, did that increase the likelihood that your door was locked or unlocked, right? Is it workable? Is it something that's actually helping you? ACT uses the term creative hopelessness to define an action or a posture that occurs when all of the behavior that we put towards a desired outcome is considered unworkable or unhelpful. Okay, so for instance, with creative hopelessness, what we were doing is we were putting all of our energy, all of our thoughts into pushing things away. Creative hopelessness is coming into contact with the idea that that's not working and it's not going to work, that you've been doing the same thing for most of your life and it's not working. And creative hopelessness makes it sound like a very negative thing, but by undermining this agenda that things need to change, that we need to control or push away, then sorry, I'm just trying to look at the question for questions. It's not the same, but when we realize that we can't control that, it allows us to try new things, right? When it helps us to recognize that we're not truly benefiting from the struggle, from the avoidance, that's when new things can emerge. So it's creative. We're recognizing the hopelessness of this control agenda. Now it's time to talk about psychopathology from an ACT perspective. So think back to that, or flip back to that triangle, right? There's the 3 corners, and each corner had two components to it. So the first component is cognitive fusion. The first way, remember I said psychopathology is basically mental illness, in other words. And ACT attempts to answer the question that all psychology theories do, is how do we get stuck? How do we get unstuck? One way that it happens from the ACT perspective is through cognitive fusion. You see, I put a picture of a welder in there because I want you to think about fusion like that. Fusion is like when a welder welds two pieces of metal together and they are now functionally one. When you get caught up with your thoughts and you allow them to dominate, when you become indistinguishable from that thought. The same way that fusing two pieces of metal brings them to be one, the fusing or the over-identification with a belief or a thought or a feeling, it makes you one with that. It makes that your literal truth. Right? Some examples of fusion, right? Rules that we tell ourselves: I shouldn't be feeling this way. I can't go to the party when I feel anxious. Right? Because when I say to myself, I can't go to the party when I feel anxious, and I fuse to it, I'm one with it. And I believe it 100%. It's literally true. Okay. It's not just a thought that I'm having that could be true or could be false. It is true. So I am not going to go. And that's going to narrow down my worldview, and it's going to take me out of my life. Right? We can very quickly see how when we accept these fused thoughts as absolute truths, they can get in our way, right? In good ways and bad, right? Reasons that we tell ourselves: I might fail. I shouldn't have to. I'm bad. You're mean, right? Judgments that we have, right? About other people, about situations. We can ruminate on things that hurt us in the past: failures, mistakes, reliving good old days. We can worry about the future, fantasizing about a better life. Or we can have a lot of these negative, what CBT might call core beliefs. I'm weak, I'm useless, I'm unlovable, right? But the difference here is that what our goal is to get away from this connection and look at our thoughts more objectively, rather than trying to change the content of the thought. So the other side of cognitive fusion is diffusion. I know, very creative. What it means is we're separating or we're distancing ourselves from that thought. So the way that you're welding two pieces of metal together to become one, you and your thoughts become one. Through diffusion, we are distancing so that there's a little bit of space. Okay, the thought's still there, belief is still there, but I can learn how to let the thoughts come and go and to view them more as thoughts that I'm having rather than literal factual information that's flowing into my brain. Right? We're looking at our thoughts rather than from the thoughts. Noticing thoughts as opposed to getting caught up in them. And learning how to let those thoughts come and go rather than holding on tightly to them. The goal of cognitive diffusion for yourself, for anybody that you might be working with, is to see the true nature of thoughts. They're words, they're pictures. They're experiences that are generated by our very sophisticated brain to protect us. Okay? We can respond to those thoughts in terms of workability. How helpful are they? Rather than, are they true or are they false? Remember, it's not important whether or not a thought is true or right. It's much more important to figure out whether or not it is helpful in helping you to reach your goals. So how do we do this? There are books full of diffusion exercises, and I am not going to go through every single one, but I do want to give you somewhat of a taste of what diffusion looks like and how we might do it in a session. So we're going to be, through noticing the process of thinking, learning, we're going to learn experientially that our thoughts don't control our actions. Okay. So let me talk about a few common diffusion techniques. Now, we have the more classic ones, right? It's very foundational for ACT. I'm having the thought that, okay? Let me just think of a negative thought. I'm having the thought that I'll never be a good father. Okay, that's a negative thought that causes me distress. So I say the thought, I'll never be a good father. Okay. Now, say that thought with the prefix, I'm having the thought that. I'm having the thought that I'll never be a good father. Okay, we can see that by adding this up, this piece of language beforehand. What it does is it starts to loosen up that hold, right? Because when I just say I'll never be a good father, that's a belief that I'm stating as literal fact, and I have an emotional reaction to that, right? When I'm noticing that I'm having the thought, I'm taking one step back and I'm saying, I'm noticing that my brain is telling me that I'm never going to be a good father, right? We even take it a step further. I am noticing that I'm having the thought that I'll never be a good father. And I might ask somebody to say it over and over like that. Another way that we can undermine, the ACT is really big on, like when I mentioned RFT earlier, and the language and the way that language is so key to it. We're using language and metaphor to undermine this change agenda, or also undermine this connection to the feeling, right? All these things underneath here: say it in a silly voice, sing it, say it slowly, repeat it over and over, right? Write it down. All of these things, what they do is that they're introducing a little bit of space between you and the thought. And it's in that space that you can truly analyze how workable a thought is, that you can really think about it. So the point is never to push a thought away and to completely remove pain from our life. It's to get that space, right? Interested. That's an interesting thought, right? We can look at our brains for what they are: survival machines, basically, to keep us alive. And we can say, well, thanks, brain. That is an interesting thought, right? We can notice what our mind's telling us right now, right? I might ask somebody, what's your mind telling you? What do you notice? What are you noticing your mind is telling you? Because through these subtle changes in language, we're reinforcing the idea that we are not our thoughts. Our thoughts, we collect throughout our life, right? Collect them like Pokemon. We develop them over the years. And I think, I forget exactly which mindfulness teacher I heard this from or where this quote originated from, but the quote is, "You are not your thoughts, you are society's thoughts," right? Because the things that we pick up along our life, they form who we are and our values, and that's okay, right? That's how we become who we are. But that doesn't mean that everything that you pick up you have to keep. So we're gonna let, so meditative, right? We'll get into meditation shortly, but we're gonna let thoughts come and go, like passing clouds, cars driving by the house, leaves on a stream. There's lots of different ways to do that meditation. If you actually, leaves on a stream is one of my favorites. If you Google leaves on a stream meditation, or YouTube it, I promise you'll find some great short little meditations there that are really helpful, great for people of all ages and ability levels. But the idea is basically that you're envisioning yourself sitting on the side of a stream, the water's flowing by, there's leaves falling down, and every time you notice yourself have a thought, you put that thought on a leaf, you put the leaf on the stream, and you let it go. And you might do that over and over and over and over again. And your mind's going to keep bringing you more thoughts and more thoughts. And that's okay, because that's what minds do, right? But you're practicing noticing a thought pop up and just gently putting it down. Workability, I already talked about that, but we can really examine whether or not this pattern of behavior, this thinking, is helping us to meet our goals. Of course, there's also the problem solving, like I already talked about, kind of looking at the brain like the survival mechanism that it is. Its job is to solve problems, to keep us safe, to keep us alive. And when we can look at it that way, we can look at our mind not as defective or not as hurting us, but as just doing what it was designed to do. Right? Form and location, love this one. Another way that we can do diffusion is by encouraging people to physicalize the thought or the feeling, right? So I might ask somebody to close their eyes and describe a really big feeling, in terms of if it was physically present. Right? What does it look like? What does it sound like? Where is it located in space? Is it moving? Is it not moving? Is it right in front of you? Is it all around you? Right? There's so many different questions that we can really dive into as if we're painting a picture of what this really looks like. And what that does is it takes these feelings, and by physicalizing them, it's again giving us the space. We're getting a little bit of distance from whatever we're feeling by putting it into physical form. We're reinforcing the idea that it is a separate part of us that we can choose to follow or not follow. Bullying reframe, you can consider what it's like to be pushed around by that thought, belief, right? Do you want to have it run your life, or do you want to tell this bully off? There's pragmatism, which kind of goes hand in hand with workability, but you know, if I buy into this thought, where will I go from here? Right? To just think about it. Your mind is like, these are a couple different varieties here, but basically, like I said, a don't get killed machine, right? A word machine. Radio doom and gloom. You imagine the thoughts coming through your brain, and you can pretend to adjust the dial to turn up the various volumes or feedback that you're getting. We also have insight, right? When we buy into this thought or give it our attention, does our behavior change, right? Does it help? Again, hand in hand with pragmatism, workability. Of course, secondary gains, right? We can think about what this gets us, right? Thinking earlier to the example of, I don't want to go to the party because I'm anxious. Well, what's the secondary gain that I get from not going to the party? Will people reach out to me and ask me where I am? Will I get some special attention? Is there some secondary gain that I'm getting by allowing myself to be stuck in this thought? We have the computer screen where we can imagine thoughts on a computer screen. We can pretend that we're changing the font, color, format. Again, all that we're doing here is we're envisioning taking this distance from the thoughts. Right? The observing self I will be getting into, but it's basically just the idea that our thoughts are occurring and there's a part of us that's observing them, right? And tapping into that part of us that's observing, because there's a part of us deep below, beneath all of our thoughts and our feelings, that's there experiencing them. Naming the story, I love this one. If all the thoughts and the feelings are put into a book or a movie, what would we call it, right? If I think about, oh, this person's going to judge me and they're going to think I'm stupid and they're not going to, and I go down this I'm a failure rabbit hole. I might say, well, it kind of sounds like this is I'm the failure story coming up again. Very brief overview of just some very common ways that an ACT therapist might attempt to start to loosen up some of the attachment that we have to certain thoughts or beliefs or feelings that ultimately aren't serving us. Experience, so thinking back to the triangle, right? At the top, we had fusion and we had avoidance, okay? At the, or acceptance, I guess, is the other side of that. Experiential avoidance, think about it this way. We have fusion, where we're one-on-one, we're stuck to this thought or this feeling. On the other hand, we have experiential avoidance, which is an individual's attempt to avoid, suppress, or otherwise alter the form of a negatively evaluated event. Okay, remember, holding the paper out. This is my avoidance. Okay, I am putting up this blinder in front of me so that I don't see it, and I'm trying to push it away. An example of some of the ways that this might show up for you in a session or with the people that you support is a client is going to yell at you after you ask them about the truthfulness of a statement, verbal aggression, right? We might see property destruction. Client flips over a table and a chair and demands to go to the hospital because they're in pain, because they think if I go to the hospital, I will escape this pain. A client with symptoms of OCD might become aggressive if you try to, move their things or interrupt their rituals, right? These are all just examples that I came up with from things that I've had happen to me at various points in time throughout my career. But these can all be viewed through the lens of avoidance. So the other side of avoidance, right? We've answered the question of how do we get stuck? How do we get unstuck, right? Through acceptance and willingness. What does this actually mean? Well, we allow our thoughts and our feelings to be as they are, regardless of whether they are pleasant or painful. We open up and make room for them, drop the struggle with them. Remember, drop the struggle. Let them come and go as they naturally do. The goal here is to allow ourselves to have painful experiences if this is important, if doing so enables us to act in our values. And this is big because when I talk about acceptance, I often get pushback from people because they think that when I am asking them to accept something, that I'm telling them to just suck it up and deal with something that sucks. And that's not what it's all about. It's not about suffering for the sake of suffering. It's about letting yourself experience uncomfortable and painful feelings. When doing that allows you to get into your life and do things that are important to you. Right? I'm not going to ask somebody to accept something that isn't serving them and isn't in guidance with their values, right? You don't have to accept that. You don't have to accept everything, right? But we accept the things that we have to reach our goals, to live out our values. So we do this by making full, open, undefended contact with unwanted private experiences, which sounds both very, I feel like, somewhat easy, but also very challenging at the same time. I'm going to go over a couple techniques here, and it's interesting because sometimes there's going to be a little bit of overlap here because through the nature of fusion and avoidance, a lot of times we do both, right? It's not that there are some people who are fusing people and some people who are avoiding people. We all fuse to things and we all avoid things every day. Some things small and some things large, right? Like if my individual who doesn't want to go to the party because they're anxious, but being connected socially and being around friends is a value, right? We're going to work on how do I sit with that anxiety and let that anxiety sit in the back seat with me while I still do the thing that's important to me. Okay. Healing hand. You can lay a hand on part of your body where you feel this most intently. You can imagine a healing hand of a loving nurse or parent or partner and send some warmth into that area. Not necessarily to get rid of it, but to just open up around it, to experience it. The struggle switch is when we talk about, at a scale, if there's a switch and the dial is 0 to 10, and 10 is I'm fully struggling with this feeling, and 0 is I'm not struggling at all. I might ask where are you at? How can we adjust it? Can we bring it up a notch? Can we bring it down a notch? So just really exploring, but through that process of exploring, we're engaging. If you remember what I said earlier about CBT, the reason CBT works is because of the exposure component. Through the act of examining and exposing ourselves to an emotion, we are, in a sense, inoculating ourselves. We're making space for it and realizing, it's okay that this is okay, right? I'm okay. This isn't going to last forever. We can soften up around the feeling, loosen it, hold it gently. Normalize it, right? This feeling tells you that you're human, who has a heart and who cares about things. Right? This is what humans feel when there's a gap between what we want and what we've got. There's a lot of great metaphors. You can see at the bottom, pushing away papers, the one that we started with earlier. Passengers on a bus. It's the idea that you can have all of these anxiety, depression, pain, fear, all these passengers on your bus, but you can still drive your bus. Because as soon as you start to you try to get rid of passengers, they're going to have more control. Allowing, just seeing if we can allow this feeling to be there, right? The choice to feel. Suppose I give you a choice. You can never have this feeling ever again, but it means you lose all capacity to love and care. Or you get to love and care, but feelings like the one you're feeling show up. what would you choose? The curious scientist, I talk about this a lot. Zoom in on this feeling or this thought as if you are a curious scientist or an alien from another planet studying humans, right? What is it like? Where does it start? Where does it stop? Very similar to physicalizing. We breathe into it. We see if we can open up and expand the feeling, right? Compassion, holding this feeling gently, as if we would a crying baby. We can notice where, noticing where the feeling is, where we're really focusing our attention on it, identifying where it is in the body, physicalizing it, much similar to the diffusion technique. But by physicalizing it in this sense, what we're doing is we're putting more attention on it and focus on it. And then, of course, the observing self, which is that part of us that is experiencing, thinking, feeling, understanding that nothing lasts forever. The maddest you've ever been, if you can imagine that, if you can think of a time where you've been mad, or even the saddest you've ever been, you're not that mad and you're not that sad right now. So what that tells us is that that experience is not everlasting and forever, right? You can survive it. And things that, here's just a cute little picture that I put in there of ways that you can, things that you can do with your feelings when they're feeling really big. I just love names. Okay, contact with the present moment. What this means. So again, from an ACT perspective, the main two ways that people struggle and suffer is when they fuse and they avoid. They overly identify or they try to push away. Okay. Now, ways that we can get around this, or the ways that we try to get people more engaged and more present at accepting things, is through contacting the present moment, i.e., mindfulness. Being in the here and now, fully conscious of our experience instead of being lost in our thoughts. Paying careful, flexible attention to our inner world and the outer world, right? But the goal is to enhance our awareness, okay? I like to think of, I often will talk about it as if we're building an awareness muscle of our experience in the present moment so that we can perceive accurately what's happening and gather important information about whether to change or persist in behavior. So engaging fully, being fully aware of what's going on under the hood in our brains. Okay. And we can do this by noticing what's happening in the here and now, discriminating between noticing and thinking, right? Buying a thought versus noticing we're having it, and paying attention to both the inner and outer world. This is going to sound very similar to when I talk about diffusion and talk about acceptance, but that's because all of these things are connected, right? ACT is not going to just attack a problem through the lens of fusion. We're also going to look at it from other perspectives. So here's some really simple ways that we can practice. We can practice this. So, for example, contact with the present moment. These are some ways that I might do it. This is a simple exercise to center yourself and connect with your environment. You can practice it throughout the day, especially any time where you find yourself getting caught up in thoughts and feelings. But basically, you're just going to take 10 slow, deep breaths and focus on breathing out as much as possible until your lungs are empty. Allow them to refill. Notice the sensations. Allow them to refill. See your thoughts come and go, just like leaves on a stream. And expanding your awareness, really just focusing, taking 10 really deep, purposeful breaths. I know it sounds very straightforward, but it is really practical, very powerful. Dropping the anchor is another simple way to center yourself and connect with the world around you. We practice it throughout the day, anytime, but you plant your feet on the floor, you push them down, you notice the floor beneath you, supporting you. You notice the muscle tension in your legs as you push your feet down. Notice your entire body, the feeling of gravity flowing down through your head, spine, legs into your feet. And you look around, you notice what you see and hear around you. So we're anchoring, we're bringing ourselves, we're grounding, we're bringing ourselves into the present. Noticing 5 things is great. You can just look around and notice 5 things that you can feel in contact with your body. Noticing 5 things you can see, 5 things you can hear, right? These are all really great ways to ground us into the present moment so that we are not quite so focused on what's going on outside of the present moment. Because when we're fused to something and when we're either fused to something or we're avoiding something, what we're not doing, as this exercise showed us earlier, remember holding the paper out? What it's showing us is that we're not really there, right? Because if I'm focusing on pushing away a thought or overly identifying with a thought, like fusion, I'm not really in the moment, right? I'm not experiencing the things that are going on around me. So our goal is to become more mindful and aware. Picking an activity in your morning routine, right? So pick an activity that constitutes part of your daily routine, brushing your teeth, shaving, making the bed, taking a shower. And when you do that, focus totally on what you're doing, your body movements, the taste, the touch, the smell, the sight, the sound, and so on. We want to notice what's happening with an attitude of openness and curiosity. For example, taking a shower, okay? Notice the sounds of the water as it sprays out of the nozzle, as it hits your body, as it gurgles down the drain. You can notice the temperature of the water. You can notice the feel of it in your hair, on your shoulders, running down your legs, right? Notice the smells, soap, shampoo. Notice the sights, water droplets running down a shower curtain, water dripping down your body, steam rising upward, right? There's lots of different things that we can focus on, but when thoughts arise, we simply acknowledge those thoughts. We let them come and go, like passing cars or leaves on a stream. And then we just go back to focusing on the activity. And that's a really simple way to become more present and mindful in what we do. The same thing can be done with mindfulness of domestic chores or when doing a pleasant activity, such as listening to music, going for a walk, right? Spending time with people you care about. Notice those things. A lot of people will ask me how they can do more mindfulness. A lot of people will say like, well, what do I use? Do I use an app? Which app do I use? I actually love mindfulness apps. If you do not or have never used a mindfulness app, I highly recommend trying it because, as I tell all my patients, we're building that awareness muscle. And you don't build an awareness muscle by working out one day a week. You build an awareness muscle by working out every day. So even if you can dedicate 5 minutes, 10 minutes to a daily mindfulness practice where you're sitting down and really just focusing 100% on your body or your environment, that's going to go a lot further than you think. And it's really going to help you be more present with the people that you care about and the people that you support. If you go to the App Store, you go to Google Play, and you just type in mindfulness, you're going to be bombarded with options, a lot of them free. Headspace, Calm, 10% Happier, Waking Up. There's so many different ones out there, and I don't necessarily like one more than the other. I think they're all great. I just highly recommend making the commitment to doing that. So now we're going to get into the conceptualized self. The conceptualized self is one of the other corners of the ACT triangle, and it's probably the most heady philosophical part of ACT. Okay, the conceptualized self is basically this view that we have of ourselves. Remember how I said earlier that you don't think your own thoughts, you think the culture's thoughts. We are just a collection of our thoughts and our beliefs, and they occur on the playing field that is our mind, right? So the self is context, or the conceptualized self. All the beliefs, thoughts, ideas that we have about ourselves are self-descriptions. I am a good son. I am a hard worker, or I am unlovable. I am terrible, right? Regardless of what the content is, you can think about it through the lens of fusion, right? We can easily become fused to these descriptions of ourselves, which can be really positive sometimes, but even when they're positive, they can hold us back. Think about the fact that I'm independent, right? That's a really positive attribute, and I think it's a thing that a lot of the people we support want. But what happens when we become so independent that when we need to ask for help, we can't, because our self-belief, our self-description tells us that I'm an independent person, I don't need help. Well, then we're likely going to see some suffering. Right? So we can be fused to the conceptualized self, and anytime that we do this, we believe I am my thoughts, right? So what is the flip side to self as content? Well, self is context, okay? Pure awareness. It is not a thought or a feeling, but a viewpoint from which we observe thoughts and feelings and the space from which those thoughts and feelings can move. So much like with mindfulness, this is very similar, but it's the idea that we are the vessel through which thoughts occur. So there's a part of us that's beneath the thought that we're having that's viewing it. Almost like I like to imagine a little person in my head sitting in front of a TV screen and watching all the thoughts and the feelings and the judgments pop up, right? That little person is me, right? I'm experiencing these thoughts and these feelings that are coming through. And by doing this, one, it promotes diffusion, right? Because it is really the idea that we're not our thoughts, right? We have thoughts, but what we choose to do with those thoughts can be in the service of our values. So with the goal with self as context, ways that we promote it is we want to connect with this transcendent sense of self. I know I said it gets a little heady, but I promise this is all very helpful when it's packaged together. It's separate from thoughts and feelings, provides us from a safe and constant viewpoint from which to observe and accept them. Any mindfulness practice is generally going to lead to this, because if you think about sitting with your thoughts, putting a thought on a leaf, letting a thought go, right? We're promoting that idea that thoughts are flowing in and out of us like a stream. Now, practically, there are some ways that we can actually promote this in the people that we support, okay? So for instance, responding to our own responding, encouraging and reinforcing tacting, or in other words, labeling, right? But beyond this, so when we're working with somebody on labeling things or putting words to feelings, right? We want to help them be able to describe what they're thinking or feeling. Like I mentioned earlier, instead of saying, I feel sad, we would say, I notice that I'm feeling sad. Tell me, I notice that I'm feeling sad, right? And what that does is it helps to diffuse, but it's also promoting this idea that we are separate from our thoughts, right? Our thoughts occur through us. Perspective taking, right? By simply observing our experience without taking sides, that helps to promote this idea of self as context. And I use self-disclosure a lot too with people that I support, right? When I get hurt, like you, I find it difficult to step back sometimes and just let the hurt be there. Sometimes I see it as a part of me. We're modeling this labeling. Two common metaphors that I might use, or exercises, if you will. The chessboard metaphor is really helpful here. What I would ask you to do is imagine a chessboard where all the white pieces are all your positive thoughts and feelings. The black pieces are all the negative ones. So we go through life desperately trying to move our white pieces across and wipe off the black pieces. The problem is there's an infinite number of white and black pieces. No matter how many black pieces you wipe off, more will appear. Also, the white pieces attract black pieces. You move forward the white piece, I'm not a good parent. And it immediately attracts the black piece. Yes, or I'm a good parent. No, you're not. What about the way you yelled at your kids last night? So we can go through life wasting a lot of time and energy trying to win this battle that can never be won. Or we can learn how to be more like the chessboard itself. The board is in intimate contact with all the pieces, but it's not involved in the battle. And there's a part of us that operates like that chessboard. In ACT, we call it the observing self. It enables us to step out of the battle with our thoughts and feelings while giving them plenty of space to move around. So that's the chessboard metaphor. What I would like to do now is actually do a little bit of a mindfulness exercise with everybody, kind of shake things up a little bit and help us get more present as we move into the latter part of this presentation here. And this is called the observer exercise. It's going to take a few minutes, but what I'm going to ask everybody to do with me, obviously your cameras aren't on or anything like that. But if you're in a place where you can do this right now, I invite you to follow along with me and just listen. I invite you to sit up straight with your feet flat on the floor. Fix your eyes on a spot or close them. Notice the breath flowing in and out of your lungs. Notice it coming in through your nostrils, down your lungs, back out again. And as you do this, be aware you're noticing. There goes your breath. There you are noticing it. If you notice your breath, you cannot be your breath. Your breath changes continually, sometimes shallow, sometimes deep, sometimes fast, sometimes slow. You that notices your breath does not change. When you were a child, your lungs were so much smaller. But the you who can notice your breathing as a child is the same you who can notice it as an adult. And that gets your mind whirling, analyzing, philosophizing, debating. So now take a step back and notice. Where are your thoughts? Where do they seem to be located? Are they moving or still? Are they pictures or words? And as you do notice your thoughts, be aware you're noticing. There go your thoughts. And there you are noticing them. If you can notice your thoughts, you cannot be your thoughts. Your thoughts change continuously. Sometimes true, sometimes false, sometimes positive, sometimes negative, sometimes happy, sometimes sad. The part of you that notices your thoughts does not change. And when you were a child, your thoughts were so very different than they are today. But the you who could notice your thoughts as a child is the same you who notices them as an adult. Now, I don't expect your mind to agree to this. In fact, I expect throughout the rest of this exercise, your mind's going to debate, analyze, attack, or intellectualize whatever I say. So see if you can let those thoughts come and go like passing cars, and engage in the exercise no matter how hard your mind tries to pull you away. Now notice your body in the chair. As you do that, be aware you're noticing. There is your body. And there you are noticing it. It's not the same body you had as a baby, as a child, as a teenager. You may have had bits put into it or bits cut out of it. You have scars, wrinkles, moles, blemishes, sunspots. It's not the same skin you had in your youth, that's for sure. But the part of you that notices your body never changes. As a child, when you looked in the mirror, your reflection was very different than it is today. But the you who can notice your reflection is the same you that notices your reflection today. Now quickly scan your body from head to toe and notice the different feelings and sensations. Pick any feeling or sensation that captures your interest and observe it with curiosity, noticing where it starts and stops, how deep in it goes, what its shape is, its temperature. And as you notice this feeling or sensation, just be aware you're noticing. There's the feeling, and there you are noticing it. You can notice this feeling or sensation. You cannot be this sensation or feeling. Your feelings and sensations change continually. Sometimes you're happy. Sometimes you feel sad. Sometimes you feel healthy. Sometimes you feel sick. Sometimes you get stressed. Sometimes relaxed. But the part of you that notices your feelings does not change. When you're frightened, angry, or sad in your life today, the you who can notice these feelings is the same you that can notice your feelings as a child. Now notice the role you're playing in this moment. And as you do that, be aware you're noticing. Right now, you're playing the role of a client, but your roles change continuously. At times, you're in the role of a mother, father, son, daughter, brother, sister, friend, enemy, neighbor, rival, student, teacher, citizen. The list goes on and on. If you can notice those roles, you cannot be those roles. There are some roles you'll never have again, like the role of a young child. But the you who notices your roles does not change. It's the same you that can notice your roles even when you were young. We don't have a good name in everyday language for this part of you. I'm going to call it the observing self. But you don't have to call it that. You can call it whatever you'd like. And this observing self is like the sky. It's the clouds that pass on it without being a part of it. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes and you can return to be present in this moment now. Now that was a little longer, but I really like this exercise because it really helps to illustrate this idea that the fact that you can notice that you're having an experience means that you're not that experience. Okay? It means that there's a part of you that's observing the feeling, the thought, the belief. It's separate. I think that can be really powerful for a lot of people. It's now that I want to move into the last two components of the ACT approach. The first of which is values. So when we think to that last corner there, that bottom right corner of the triangle, we have values and we have committed actions. So far we've talked about one, the ways that we get stuck, right? From the perspective of ACT, that's through fusion and avoidance. We've also talked about ways that we can be more present with our experience through mindfulness and through this transcendent sense of self, this idea that we are not our thoughts and our feelings. Okay. The final pillar of ACT that we're really going to attack is why? Why should I do all this stuff? Right? And that's because of our values. Right? We want to connect with our values. What this means, values are basically a statement about what we want to be doing with our life, about what we want to stand for, and how we want to behave on an ongoing basis. The goal is to clarify what gives our life a sense of meaning or purpose, and to use our values as an ongoing guide for action. I'm going to distinguish between values and goals and help clients connect with and clarify their values so that they can inspire, motivate, and guide ongoing actions. Something that I will often use with folks, or I will often discuss with folks, is the difference between values and goals, right? I think some people have a tendency to see them as very interchangeable, but values are more of an ongoing action, right? Values are not things that we ever arrive at necessarily, okay? I'm not just going to one day go to my wife and say, you know what, honey, I think I did it. I think I met my value of being a good husband. All done, right? Because it's not a thing that we just finish. It's an ongoing process, and it can go on throughout the lifespan. Okay. Another way that I like to explain this to people is like a GPS. If you're driving in your car, the value is like the direction that you're moving in: north, south, east, west. But the destinations and the towns that you pass along the way, well, these are your goals, right? Our goals are guided by our values, but goals are more achievable. And when I talk about SMART goals at the end of this, that will give a good framework for getting started with that. But some concrete values exercises, ways that we identify. Love the values card sort. I always come back to that. Google values card sort. And the first thing that you're probably going to get is something that looks like this box down here in the corner where it says personal values card sort. I cut all of these out. Unfortunately, I don't have them with me today, but I have a nice thick stack of all the things that just generic values. We have 3 piles: important to me, very important to me, and not important to me. I'm going to ask the person to sort all of those cards into piles. I'm then going to take the very important to me pile. And if it's really big, and a lot of times it's big because I think a lot of people have this tendency to believe that they need to value all these things. They go through all these lists and they say, oh, I should value that, I should value that, I should value that. And I've got this really big thick stack of very important to me's. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell the person, well, we need to whittle this down to at least 10 or less, because there's only so much that you can value on any one given day. And what I'll do with that oftentimes is I'll put together a questionnaire that's individualized to the person. So for example, here's an example of one that I made for a client who I'm going to call John. John values contribution, cooperation, fairness, honesty, trust, independence, freedom, all these things, right? So in my weekly or even bi-weekly, I might pull this out and I might say, all right, well, let's talk about the last week. And let's look at your values, the things that you identified as being valuable to you. On a scale of 0 to 5, how consistently did you live with your values? Were you truly independent in getting the things that you needed? Did you act honestly and trustworthy, right? And honestly, this is something that a person's going to have to be honest. Well, they're going to have to be honest about. But the purpose is we're bringing it back to values, right? Whenever I'm in a session and I get stuck with somebody because they're, having a hard time with fusion or diffusion, or they're having a hard time with acceptance, right? Bring it back to values. Why are we doing this, right? What's important about this? Here's an example of a bit of a more generic values worksheet that comes from one of the ACT books. The bullseye, where we're basically, it's more generic. It's just breaking it down into 4 different areas of our life and how close to the center of the bullseye that you would see yourself. Mine is just the one that I just showed you, so just a little bit more personalized. So what does it mean then to connect with values? The challenge with values and the people that we support is that if we ask most of the clients what their goals are, what are they going to tell us? I want to live in my own apartment. I want a job in the community. I want to get married and have kids, right? A lot of the same things I notice tend to pop up. And it's really difficult to know whether the things that the people that our clients, the people that we support, say that they want are really self-chosen values. I say that not in a way that's meant to be discouraging, but it comes back to this idea of what behaviors might call compliance, or this idea that our preferred things, the things that we say we want, are going to be more shaped by the environment that they're in, just like the way that culture shapes the thoughts that we have, right? So the question isn't necessarily, is the thing that person values really truly a value? The question really is, how do we help our clients get in touch with values that they really want? And the way that we do that is by expanding their experiences, right? Working with people to be able to do the things to do new things, to step out of their comfort zone, to go jump out of a plane, to go to a party that they've never been to before. And then finally, the last component of ACT is we have committed action, where the rubber meets the road, right? Taking larger and larger patterns of effective action guided and motivated by values. Flexible action is defined as readily adapting to the challenges of the situation and either persisting or changing behaviors required, doing what it takes to live by your values. The goal is to translate values into ongoing, evolving patterns of action and to establish the pattern of repeatedly returning to our values, no matter how many times we might lose touch with them. So we use values to set goals and break those goals down into more specific actions, identify barriers to action, and overcome them using the other 5 ACT processes, right? Diffusion, acceptance, contact with the present moment, transcendent self, sense of self, and values, right? We're connecting with those. Now, committed action is not always going to be fun, right? Committed action, in fact, probably won't be, because we're asking people to do things that are really hard. And when we want to help our clients formulate goals that are consistent with their values, for one, but we're probably going to need to create a lot of really small goals and milestones along the way. Okay. And it might take a long time. The nature of the clients that we all support, we know that change is often slow and it's never linear. Sometimes we might take a step back, and that's okay. We just want to make sure that we're managing expectations and reinforcing even the smallest steps. So this, in terms of when we're talking about the folks here that might write personal plans and treatment plans, things like that, I want to go over a little bit about SMART goals. I really like SMART goals because it's an ACT approach But when it comes to setting goals, we want to make sure that our goals are SMART, and that you can see how it breaks down here, the different components of that. SMART goals are specific. We specify the action that an individual is going to take and when and where you'll do it, who or what is involved. So for example, it's vague to say, I'm going to spend time with my kids. A more specific goal would be, I will take my kids to the park on Saturday afternoon to play basketball, right? We have a date, we have a time, we have an activity, right? Rather than just, I'm just going to do this. I'm going to do this more often, right? Specific goals. Make your goals specific enough so that you can easily tell whether or not you've achieved it. Well, it's Saturday night. Did I go to the park this afternoon and play basketball? Yes or no? It needs to be meaningful. So if the goal is generally guided by our values as opposed to following a rigid rule, trying to please others or trying to avoid some pain, it will be personally meaningful. So if it lacks a sense of meaning or purpose, check in and see if it's really guided by values, right? If you're really not showing up and it's not working, is it really a value, or is it a value that you believe that you need to have? Adaptive. Does this goal help us head in a direction as far as you can predict that is likely to improve our life? Is it workable? What's the workability? Realistic. Your goal should be realistically achievable. Take into account your health, competing demands on your time, financial status, whether you have the skills to achieve it. So I said I get people to whittle down their list of values because it's unrealistic to value everything. There's constraints to our time. So we need to decide what's most important. And then time framed. To increase the specificity, set a day, date, time for it. If not possible, set as accurate a time frame as possible. All right, this brings me to the last thing that I wanted to talk about, and these are goals that can get in the way of committed action. Or sorry, things that can get in the way of committed action, right? Barriers. Use the FEAR acronym. Fusion, excessive goals, avoidance of discomfort, and remoteness from values. And when these things are present, we have fusion, excessive goals, avoidance of discomfort. That's when committed action kind of goes off the rails, right? We get fused to thoughts and beliefs. We come up with way too many goals, right? Way too many unachievable goals. We are uncomfortable with sitting with that discomfort we're experientially avoiding. And we're not connected to our values. And when we see these things in place, chances are that's why committed action is struggling. That's why people are not showing up when they say that they're going to show up. So, right, what is the alternatives to this? We have diffusion, acceptance of discomfort, setting realistic goals, and embracing our values, right? Dare. So the solution to fear is to dare. That brings me to more or less the conclusion of what I want to talk about. What I will say, a few things here, is that where do we go from here, right? We want to learn. We want to learn more about ACT. We want to practice it more. What I would recommend: one, check out the Association for Contextual Behavior Science. It is basically a website devoted to third wave behaviorism. Contextualscience.org. You can join. I'm pretty sure you can join as a free member, and there are a plethora of free resources, articles, videos, things like that. Also, highly, highly recommend ACT Made Simple. It is a workbook style premiere on ACT. It goes through all the components. You can go at your own pace. It's a fantastic book. For those of you more therapy minded, there's of course the original Acceptance and Commitment Therapy, now in its second edition, the original book written by Dr. Steve Hayes, the kind of father of ACT in a sense. And yeah, that brings me to the conclusion of today's talk. I want to leave some time if anybody has any questions.
Thank you so much, Tyler. I'm not seeing any questions right now, but if you do have a question, please be sure to put that in the chat box or the Q&A box. I didn't have a specific question for you. I just wanted to say how much I appreciated your discussion on connecting and using values. I think it's just a good reminder to all of us about the importance of our person-centered work, whether or not you are using the principles of ACT or something else. Do you, by chance, can you think of maybe an individual that you've worked with that you've used the principles of ACT, and maybe can you give a little overview of that?
Yes. So I've worked with an individual. I'm going to think back to my residential days because that's where I did a lot of great work in day programming. An individual who really struggled with urges. Urges were really big for him. I think he's the example of John that I used earlier for my values sheet. And so John values these things. He tended to get really obsessive about dangerous things like storms, like electricity, like things that were just really kind of like dangerous. And he would get very, very fused to these things. And he would also get very fused to things like wanting things to eat, wanting, pop. And he was, diabetic, and it was causing him some issues. So we did a lot of work on urges, and we looked at urges through the lens of fusion, right? So we would often do exercises where this individual would experience really strong urges to do maladaptive things. And we would look at these things like this urge as kind of like a secondary passenger in his brain. And it was having him do these things. And we would diffuse from it, and we would look at it but more objectively. But the goal was always to try to put a little bit more space between the urge and the actual action. That was always our goal. And I would always talk with him about the way that, I never want to tell somebody, telling somebody that they shouldn't engage in a urge that they have. What I will tell them is that I would want them to, is there a way that you can put a little bit of time between when you're acting on the urge and when you're not acting on the urge, and acting on the urge, where you can actually make a decision based on your values, right? Our goal was always on increasing the distance between having an urge and acting on the urge. Even if he acted on the urge, that was always a success, at least from my perspective, because he's taking that time to examine or learn. That's what I mean when I talk about really small steps guided by values. For instance, this individual really wanted to work in the community, and his impulsivity was just making that almost impossible because it was really hard to stay on task and not engage in, not necessarily dangerous, but just very off task and distracting behavior. And we worked on building that space, right? Getting that space where we're able to make choices based on our values. Yes, and a lot of the same way I would use this as an urge in terms of urges for self-harm, right? Self-harm, I see that question pop up in the chat. ACT is useful for pretty much any type of psychological disorder. And I would look at, I guess it would depend on the type of self-injury that we were talking about, right? A lot of folks may engage in non-suicidal self-injury. And a lot of times the research that we have on that, a lot of times shows us that has more to do with being somewhat of a cathartic relief from really challenging behaviors. ACT is going to look at that from the perspective of avoidance, I would say. Now, we would instead want to look at ways that we can sit with that discomfort, that we can experience those really big emotions and feelings. Of course, also when we're looking at suicidality from the perspective of just depression and a general desire to, be dead, we would look at that more from the perspective of depression. But absolutely, I mean, I think the way that I use ACT almost the most, I didn't really talk about it too much today, but the way that ACT can be used very effectively for urges. There's a term in ACT called urge surfing, where we're working on identifying what those urges are and kind of riding them out and putting that space in between it so that we're able to make more thoughtful, values-based decisions. Yeah. Any other thoughts?
I think everyone, it seems like we're getting a lot of thank yous for the extensive knowledge that you've provided and the techniques that you shared. So I don't see any more questions from anyone. So thank you so much, Tyler. Wonderful presentation. Just a reminder to everyone, give me about 14 days to get those continuing education certificates out, and be sure to look at our website for our upcoming workshops. Thank you, everyone.